Hi everybody, it's Susan from Sunrise Quilt Studio, and today I have a Christmas themed quilt block for you. This one is called Christmas Bauble, and this is an 8-inch block. It uses 2 prints plus a background, and my background is a low volume print also, but you could use a solid if you want. And this is from the Pine Valley line by Basic Gray. So it's pretty easy to do. We just have some easy corner triangles, flying geese units, and a square unit in the center. So the hardest thing is if you have directional fabrics, then you'll need to watch how those fabrics are laying. But anyway, I hope you'll stay with me and I'll show you how to make the Christmas Bauble block. Okay, here are the fabrics you need for the Christmas Bauble block. For A, you will need 4 2.5 by 4.5 inch rectangles. B is 8 2.5 inch squares. C is 1 4.5 inch square. D is 2 2.5 by 4.5 inch rectangles, and E is 4 2.5 inch squares. And you'll want to draw diagonal lines on the wrong sides of both the B and the E fabrics. So both of the squares, of the small squares, you'll want to draw diagonal lines. So I'm going to adjust the camera and we'll get started by making the square and a square block. Okay, first thing is the square and a square block, and that will need the C square and the B squares. And what I recommend is using a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance on these, or that wouldn't be right. What I would recommend is sewing just to the right side of the drawn line on these, or use a 50 or 60 weight thread. Now I have a all-purpose thread, so that's usually about a 40 weight, so it's a little bit heavier, and what that does is it takes up space and it makes your block smaller. So I'm going to sew just a little bit to the side of my drawn line, to the right side of it. So I want this to measure 4.5 inches square when I'm done. So I'm going to start with one corner. The drawn line goes from center to center. I'm going to do this side, and then I'll do the opposite side, trim and press, and then do the other 2 corners. Okay, let's swing it around to the opposite corner and do the same thing. Now these fabrics aren't directional right now, but I do have, my A fabrics are directional, so I'm going to be paying attention to the direction of those fabrics when I sew them. Okay, I'm going to trim and press. I'm going to leave a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And of course you can use your rotary cutter and ruler if you want to do that. It's just easier for me to grab my scissors here and press these open. Okay. So here we have that. And now I need to sew squares onto the opposite corners. And you're either sewing directly on that drawn line or just to the right of it, depending on the type of thread you're using. But I am currently out of my 50 weight thread, which is what I prefer to use, but it's I'm out of it right now. So, and our local stores don't carry 50 weight, so I have to mail order that. And I have it placed an order at my online on my online shop lately, so I'll have to remember to do that with my next order. Okay, I'm going to press these open after I get these trimmed off. Okay, so there's my square and a square unit. And I have a ruler here. This is a 5-inch ruler. And this is pretty close. It's actually a little bit larger on one side. Just a little over 4.5. So that's better than too short anyway. So I'm going to use the remaining 4 B squares and then the D rectangles and make flying geese units. And I'm going to do for this I'm going to go ahead and sew directly on the line, because I have found that since there's only 2 seams in the flying geese unit and there's 4 here, this is going to tend to be smaller. That's why I use a scant 1/4 inch to make sure I have 4.5 inches square. This I don't have any problems with. So you have to get to know how your units come out when you sew. But kind of the rule of thumb is the more seams you have, the smaller your unit is going to be. So I don't want to make this any bigger because it's going to wind up being probably a little bit large anyway. Okay, press back that triangle and then sew on this one. And this drawn line goes from the center to the bottom left-hand corner, whereas the first one went from the center to the bottom right-hand corner. And at the end of the video, I'll show you a couple of suggestions on what to do with these blocks. So let me press this one back. Okay, so there's one flying geese unit, and I need to make one more. And the last square. Okay, second flying geese unit. Now what I need to do is to sew these on to the square and a square unit, and we're going to put the background towards the red on these. So they're going to go this direction. And these line up really well, so we've got our size correct on these. Sometimes my flying geese are longer than my square and a square unit, but this time they came out just right. Okay, I'm going to sew the other side. press those back. Okay, so here's the center of the block. So we have the square and a square unit and then a flying geese unit on each side. So now we need to do the top, and that will be the A and the E fabrics. And you could cut this A fabric at 8.5 inches, but I think you will find out that this is going to wind up being way too long for your block. That's why I've added a seam in there. For me, it works better that way. Now I'm going to divide these into 2 units, and my fabric has a direction to it. This is a scene. There's animals and Christmas trees and shepherds. There's baby Jesus. So this is like a kind of like a manger scene, but there's a lot of other things in the background. There's a rabbit and a poinsettia and a present. So lots of Christmas themed things. So I want one of these to go right side up. I want the other one to go right side down. So I'm going to rotate those, and I need to sew E-squares onto them. So for these top 2, for one of these I'm going to sew it on the right side. So one of them that's facing up, we're going to go on the right side. And sew on that drawn line. Okay, now the one that's going to go next to it needs a square on the opposite side, so the left side. And that needs to go from the center to the bottom left-hand corner. Okay, now we need to trim off these corners, press the triangle back, and then sew them together. Now if you don't have directional fabric, you don't have to do this thinking about which way everything is facing, and it'll go together really quickly for you. Okay, so I'm going to put the dark print together, and you can see, well, I don't know if you can see or not, but anyway, the print, the direction of the print is, they're both facing the same way. So I'm going to put those together, and I'm going to sew 1/4 inch seam here. Okay, and then I'll press this seam. I'm going to press this seam open. You can press it to one side or the other. It doesn't really matter, but I'm going to press this open. So here is the top of the Bauble block. And so we're going to flip it for the bottom part. So it's going to look like this. So I'm going to work with my fabric directions, my pattern upside down there, and sew on the square. And this one is going to go this way. Okay, so the center seam. Okay, so here's the other one. So now you just to put these 3 rows together. And I'm going to line up. Another thing about this seam is you can line it up with the point here on the square and a square unit to center everything. And then I'm going to line up the ends. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and add the other piece. Okay, and sew these together. Okay, I'm going to press these back and we'll take a look at the block. Okay, here is the completed bauble block. So I think this turned out really well. I don't have anything to add other than if you've got directional fabrics and you care about which way they face, you'll need to watch those, especially on these areas. With the flying geese and the square and a square unit, you'd also have to watch there. So it's easier if you don't have directional fabrics, but if you do, it can be done. You just have to kind of watch how your fabric is laying when you're sewing on your pieces. So I want to show you a couple more blocks that I made. Here is another one. This one had directional fabric in both the top and the bottom and in these. So I was really careful on how all of these pieces were placed so that it would give me the look that I wanted. And this one also had some directional fabric here. So I made sure that all of the stripes were kind of going the same direction. And then this one had no directional fabrics in it, so I didn't have to worry about anything. This is my first block. It came out a little bit wonky because I did not use a scant 1/4 inch, so this is not a really good block. So I'm going to have to take this one apart and redo it so that it'll fit well into the rest of the quilt. Here are a couple of quilt layouts that you could consider. I've added flying geese units to this quilt and I have them kind of circling here. So we're alternating a bauble block with a set of 4 flying geese units. And this one is the same, it's just all the flying geese units are going vertical and alternating with some of the bauble blocks. And I'm using different fabrics in the borders here. And in this one, where it's mainly a green quilt, it reads a little more green because there's a dark green border, inner border, and then a lighter green outer border, and still alternating with some flying geese blocks. And here is a table runner, and I'm using flying geese as an inner border, and then there's a small middle border, and then a wider outer border here. And in this one, I am using some rectangles as an inner border and then a red as the outer border for this one. So this one is good for some scraps, and it's a little more simplified since they're just rectangles. And now we're back to flying geese units, and I've just turned these in a little bit different direction and using a red border here. And then this one I am positioning it like a banner instead of a table runner. So, and they also have borders around or sashing around each one of the blocks. So this will give you a couple of ideas of what you can do with these Christmas bauble blocks. Thanks for watching. For more quilting ideas, click on the video links. And to keep up with my latest projects, click on the subscribe button. I hope to see you again soon.